Okay, thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the Alium Works initial 2023 presentation. Joining us today is Jeremy Cole, who's the head of rail assurance for Lend-Lease Australia, who will be giving a presentation for the next 45 minutes or so. Following on from that will be a 15-minute Q&A session. Any questions which we may have during the presentation, if I can kindly ask you to please type them into the chat room, and we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping items. So please, if you could all mute yourself. If you'd like to leave yourself on video, more than welcome to do that. If you want to shut your video off, that's fantastic too. And just a reminder, this presentation is being recorded and will be placed onto made public 2-3 weeks after the meeting and shared with the group. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Jeremy, and yeah, off we go.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you stop sharing your screen so I can share mine? Thank you. So,
do you want me to put it up there?
Yeah. Everybody can see my screen? Can everybody see my screen or not?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. So first of all, thank you ever so much, everyone, ever so much for giving up your time today to listen to me drone on for a bit. It's going to be a combination of a couple of agendas here. So I want to try and introduce you to what rail assurance actually is. But then also, I think it's more important to understand how we can use the themes of what rail assurance brings and see how we can apply it to other industries or other infrastructure type projects. Okay, so there's a relatively short agenda. I'm not going to go on to too much detail about me and my background, except to say it's important you understand where I started and how I built into rail assurance, to understand where I'm coming from, because where I come from is quite a different perspective to, let's say, where some of my other senior colleagues come from. So I look at things through a very process systematic perspective, in that I started off in manufacturing. So when I first graduated, I was in part of a manufacturing firm that manufactured components that were used on the space shuttle, in nuclear power plants, oil and gas industry, etc., etc. So therefore, failure was not an option on a number of those things, I focused the beginning of my career in quality assurance, quality management. I then moved down to London and joined companies like London Underground, which then became Tube Lines. Joined the rail industry and focused a lot on something called Six Sigma, which is where we try and limit the variation between processes. But again, it was very systematic, very process orientated. Then when I moved over to Australia 15 years ago, I came into the rail sector, but looking at it through a construction lens. And that's where I find myself today, looking at working in the construction industry, mainly looking at rail projects, but as Lend-Lease like to have their cake and eat it, they tend to get me looking at other projects as well these days. So it's not just rail projects. And also, Lend-Lease don't do rail projects. They build large, shiny buildings, and they have these things called a complicated basement underneath. So that's my remit, to make sure we can open that complicated basement and link it up to the rest of the railway. That complicated basement you may know as a station. But a lot of my projects these days are the complicated basements underneath our nice, tall, shiny buildings. So where did rail assurance really originate in this country? I always use the Granville rail disaster as my example. Happened almost 50 years ago, and what had happened is a train derailed, and as it was coming into the Granville train station, my understanding of that disaster was it derailed pure to poor maintenance of the track. However, that derailment, as bad as it was, got a lot worse when the derailed train struck the pillar that was holding up the bridge near the Granville train station. That in turn caused the bridge to collapse onto the trains that had derailed, onto the carriages that had derailed, crushing them. So that ended up with 84 people dying. And as a result of that, they realized they need to build rail infrastructure that considered what safety and what might happen and minimize those risks, but also make sure that the assets were fit for purpose. So that leads me into what do we mean by rail assurance? And I like to think of rail assurance as three pillars that support what we call a safety argument. So these three pillars, three foundations, whatever you want to refer to them, are summed up neatly as: one, demonstrate that the asset is safe to operate and maintain; two, demonstrate that the asset is fit for purpose; and three, demonstrate that we have competent people who have completed the works. Okay, nice and easy, sum it up like that. But in reality, what does that actually mean, and how do we go about doing it? So those are the three pillars. Let's go through each one of those pillars in turn. Safe to operate and maintain. Well, most people know this as safety assurance, and safety assurance from my lens, and bearing in mind, this is just my opinion, I just know what works well for me and my teams, is where we tend to focus on the end users. Okay, so that means that we engage the operators, maintainers, and representatives, members of the public. So we think about the asset from their perspective. So normally, construction companies have safety divisions that look at workplace health and safety, and that is far more focused on the people building the asset. Okay, now I'm not going to step on their toes because they do a very good job of looking after the safety of those construction workers. What we need to do is we need to focus on, once the construction has finished and we hand over the asset into operation, we need to think about how the asset's now going to be used for the next 100, 150 years. Okay, so if you look at the life cycle of a project, the first 5-6 years are all about construction, and that's where a lot of money is being spent on designing something or constructing something. But actually, when you think about the life cycle of that asset, it's going to be there for the next 100, 150 years. And we really need to design something that has the operators and the maintainers and the members of the public front and center. Okay, so there is definitely an art of managing safety risks. So these managing safety risks is focusing on a thorough process of safety and design workshops, where designers are obliged to consider safety during the design phase, and they call these things safety and design workshops. I make sure that we have specific safety and design workshops that focus on risks that may arise during the operations and maintenance phase of the asset, either during normal operations, degraded operations, or even emergency situations. You also have to think about end of life and how we're going to decommission the asset. So in order to manage these safety risks properly, you've got to not rely on the safety risk matrix of your company, because generally a construction company or a design company doesn't think about risks longer than the time that they are involved in the asset. So a construction company like John Holland's or Lend-Lease or CPB will have a risk matrix that revolves around the lifespan of that project. Okay, when you need to manage the safety risks associated with the operations and maintenance phase, you need to use the operator's risk matrix. Okay, and in certain cases, in many cases actually, you may have more than one operator, like Sydney Trains, ARTC, or Sydney Metro, and they all have different risk matrices. So it's important to understand where the risk is and then assess that risk against the operator's risk matrix. Okay, and then we have something called a project hazard log, and that lives with the life of the asset. Okay, our job is to manage any risks and mitigate them so far as is reasonably practicable, then we can demonstrate we've got all these safety controls and it's all communicated and documented and carefully managed. Again, it's very, very process orientated, this element, because there's a process you go through, strictly adhered to, you document everything. It's not just about what's in the hazard log, it's also about the minutes of the meetings, because quite often you discuss scope or you discuss potential hazards and you choose not to document those hazards. You have a discussion in the workshop, and for whatever reason you've decided not to populate that hazard log with that risk. Therefore, the minutes of that discussion should just as valid part of demonstrating you've considered the safety risk as well as the outcome, which is the hazard log. Okay, for safety assurance, obviously the bulk of the effort's going to be during the design phase. The reason for that is because if you are identifying these risks and identifying controls that mitigate the risks, the easiest and the most cost-effective way to do that, place to do that, is before you've actually started constructing. Okay, so if you can identify the risks and either eliminate them or mitigate them so far during the design phase, happy days, you've done your job, you've earned your badge, and you can go home a happy person. So unfortunately, change does happen, and safety assurance is not only about managing those safety risks, it's also about managing the change. Okay, and the idea, and I say this to every construction company I work with or work for or work alongside, the job of the construction company is basically, excuse my French, not to fuck up what the designers have done. Okay, the designers have put in an awful lot of effort and consideration into designing something that is safe to operate and maintain. Okay, we've gone through all these hoops, and we jumped through all the hoops. We've considered things, we've documented things, and we can then say yes, that risk has been mitigated so far as is reasonably practicable. And as long as you follow that, you build what was designed, happy days, we should go home. However, there are things like variations, there are things like non-conformances, where things have either not gone according to plan or suddenly someone's changed their mind and they want something done slightly different. That's okay. Okay, change is not your enemy. Unplanned, unmanaged change is going to be where things start to go wrong. It's the same as workplace health and safety. If you need to do something, you need to plan for it, and you need to do something properly, and you need to go through certain hoops in order to make sure you've considered it from all aspects. Okay, it's the same here. If we need to change something, who's the most qualified person to agree to that change? Well, it's the person that designed it in the first place. It's not going to be the construction people. It's not going to be the people out on site or even the project managers back in the office. It's going to be the designers who get to say, yes, I don't think that change is going to have a negative impact on the safety of the asset. I think you can go ahead with it, or yes, you can go ahead with it, but I'd appreciate it if you did it this way. Okay, so change is not your enemy. Unplanned, unmanaged change is. So that sums up what safety assurance is, and that's how we demonstrate an asset is safe to operate and maintain. I could go on for hours on this one, but I'm not going to. So moving forward, systems assurance, which is how we demonstrate the asset is fit for purpose. So when I first came to Lend-Lease, I explained what we did with the systems assurance, and I got a lot of knowing nods from our project managers, and they said, well, that's what we do anyway, which demonstrates it is actually just good project management. So what is it that we mean by systems assurance? Well, there's a whole bunch of specialist systems engineering subjects like earthing and bonding, or fire and life safety, human factors, RAMs. These are all specialist systems engineering things that you need to consider during the design phase of a project. You have a RAMs analysis undertaken, you have a human factors analysis undertaken. All of these specialist reports, security, blast, fire and life safety, all of these specialist areas come up with a report on how that design could be improved if you did a number of things. What they come up with at the end of it is saying, yes, I believe this design is safe from a fire and life safety perspective if we do X, Y, Z. So they're going to come up with a series of requirements. Okay. There's also the original technical requirements that you get given when you do the project. So there's a number of different sources of these requirements. And these requirements could be the original technical requirements, the derived requirements that you come up with, the safety requirements, all these things. What is systems assurance? Well, dumbing it down, and I'm sure there's people who are far cleverer than I am on this call who are nodding or shaking their heads vigorously because I've dumbed it down too much. But in my mind, systems assurance is simply about stringent management of those requirements. Okay, so by stringent management of those requirements, we mean there's traceable evidence to where we met that requirement in the design phase, where we met that requirement in the construction phase, where we can demonstrate we've still achieved that requirement at point of handover. Okay, so what do I mean by that in reality? Did the people delivering the project do what they were supposed to do? Okay. This can be really onerous and really time consuming. It doesn't have to be. You can actually minimize the amount of effort by planning upfront how it's going to be. For a lot of these, in a lot of cases, it's working backwards and also thinking top down. So working backwards is what do we need at the end of it, and in order to hand over the assets at the end, you work backwards and you think, how can I achieve that end goal by doing all the different stages. Top down is systems thinking, how am I going to get the risks managed, and you think big ticket items. So if there's a fire in a station, there's a whole bunch of other systems that need to contribute to it to help mitigate the effect of that fire. Okay, so effort from systems assurance can be managed by well-planned, well-integrated systems and processes. Again, this comes back to my background, where I started off in manufacturing. And also when I came into the construction side of things, I started off looking after things like quality management, and then moved on to looking after quality and risk, and then moved on to looking after quality, risk, and project administration, which is all the document control stuff, and then started taking on things like safety assurance, commissioning, operational readiness. And suddenly, when you realize everything is actually part of a bigger picture, all these processes have outputs that contribute to the inputs of other processes, and understanding how everything links together means that you can actually think end-to-end life cycle of a project, and what does one team's output mean to another team's input, all that kind of stuff. So if you plan and integrate your systems and processes well, it means good. It means that your requirements management efforts are minimized. Finally, the third pillar is management of competence. When I came into Lend-Lease and they were new to the AEO or TAO game, where I had to say, look, you need to demonstrate you guys are competent to do the work that you're doing. They just guffawed at me because, quite frankly, if they'd already been building these things for years, Barangaroo is 9 individual buildings connected by a single basement, so it's 9 individual operating entities all integrated into one system. So yes, they can do that. What I mean by management competence is we have an auditable trail to demonstrate that we've assessed someone to be competent. Okay, so for us at Lend-Lease, it was definitely a case of the difference between managing the delivery of the asset and being technically accountable for what's delivered. So again, on an assurance framework, you are signing off quality records, and if you are signing off those quality records, you need to know what good looks like. Okay, and therefore it would be a bit pointless having let's say an architect who's very good at designing architectural buildings from an architectural perspective, signing off the drawings for an electrical schema or something like that. Again, you wouldn't have a building services project, a site engineer signing off a facade quality record. Okay, so this is what I mean by competent. You need to be competent. You need to know what good looks like on a quality record. You need to know what you're signing off on, because again, coming back to the beginning, this is all about taking ownership and being accountable for what you're signing for. Okay, so there are a multitude of ways to demonstrate you've managed competence, but at the end of the day, what we're talking about is having an auditable trail to show that someone has been assessed as being competent to do that task. Okay, so that has brought me to the end of explaining what rail assurance is. Going back to the beginning, it was achieving those 3 elements of safety argument: demonstrating that the asset is safe to operate and maintain, demonstrating that the asset is fit for purpose, demonstrating that the people delivering that work were competent to do so. Okay, so where can we then translate that to get the biggest bang for our buck? Okay, where should we focus our efforts? And this is where I move out of rail assurance into delivering technical assurance on other types of projects. Okay, so what I've done in Lend-Lease is I make sure that I've started at the beginning and at the project planning phase. So what do I mean by this? One size doesn't fit all. So we have an approach to delivering rail assurance, and you need to scale it. You need to definitely focus your efforts on different elements at different stages. Okay, so as I say, I come back from a very systems and process background. Colleagues of mine come from a technical background, and there's all these system safety functions or all the kind of technical safety arguments that you need to worry about. Okay, so during the project planning phase, you need to ensure that you've got assurance, you're considering assurance from the very, very beginning. And not only that, but when you're structuring your teams, you don't want assurance to be a bolt-on on the side. And you think, right, we've covered rail assurance because we've got a rail assurance team. They're sat in that office over there. They're not really part of the project, but they're going to get our output, put a bow around it and call it assured. That's not how it works. You really need to make sure your assurance team are sat in with the people delivering the works at the right time. So your assurance team should definitely be sat in with the design team when they are doing the design. okay? Because as I say, the bulk of the effort is during the design phase. And then as you move through the design phase into the delivery phase of a project, you really want your assurance team sat in and amongst the quality team, because guess where they're getting most of their evidence? From the quality records that the quality team make sure we have. Then as you move into the latter phase of a project, into the testing commissioning phase, you really want your assurance team closely linked to that team. Okay, always with the end goal in mind, which is how we demonstrate that we're ready to start operations. Okay, so one size doesn't fit all. You don't have a project structure having an assurance team on the side. You need to move your assurance team under different managers through the life of the project, and have them part of the project team, so that they can add the most value, and not just try and take the output and hope for the best. Next is integration, so the procurement phase. This is more and more a lesson that I'm learning later on. This has become very clear now in my role at Lendlease. You really want to consider assurance at the very, very beginning of a project, okay? When you are engaging your consultants, when you're engaging your subcontractors, make sure you build into their contracts what you need from them, okay? And when I say build into their contracts, you don't just say a catch-all statement like comply with the management plans, okay? If you are responsible for integrating other people's output, you really want to make sure that they are going to be delivering something that that looks and feels the same as another consultant is going to be delivering. So you may have a consultant delivering the building services design, you may have a consultant delivering the architectural design. Well, you know, if anybody who has worked in these projects before, when you come to assurance, it's not all about the design, it's proving that you did the right thing. And proving that you did the right thing is about all the records that come out of it at the end of it. So having an integrated design is not just about an integrated model, it's about having demonstrating that you've managed your safety risk process in an integrated fashion, you've managed your requirements management process in an integrated fashion. So how do we do that? Well, we don't want consultant A delivering us a requirements matrix that looks like a nice rectangular box, and then a consultant B delivering us a requirement matrix that is actually in a circle, whatever, I don't know. But what I normally use is consultant A delivering as apples, consultant B delivering as kangaroos. You cannot integrate those two. So what you really want is to articulate exactly what the output should be from consultant A and exactly what the output should be from consultant B. And therefore, if consultant A are delivering you apples, consultant B should be delivering you apples. It doesn't mean that they're going to be delivering the same thing. What it means is that they're going to be looking through their technical discipline through the same lens as everybody's using the same sets of templates. Everybody's used a consistent definition of status, etc., so that you know what. So when you're comparing what consultant A's output and consultant B's output, you know they're talking the same language. Okay. Moving on, safety assurance. Again, as I said before, your design phase is where you get the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, and if you can focus on getting the most from your risk workshops, and that's having a very stringent process of managing risk workshops and not being afraid to cancel them if not all the right stakeholders have turned up. Okay, and when I say stakeholders, you're not just talking designers, you're talking operators, you're talking maintainers, you're talking specialists, subject matter experts. Okay, and those workshops need to make sure that you've achieved what you need to achieve at each of them. And you can't have, let's say, a single workshop for a technical discipline. You need to have all, in my mind, it's better to look at these workshops through the location and have all the different technical disciplines who are involved in designing for that location together, and the operators. So we tend to operate an internal workshop where all the designers and the consultants come together to think about what the risks are, thrash out in their mind how they can identify the risk and identify potential controls, and then hold the same workshop a couple of weeks later, but then engage external stakeholders, because that's where you're going to get the most value. Because with all due respect to the designers and constructors, they're not going to have the same perspective as the people operating or the people maintaining. So you definitely need to engage those people early on, and you need to conduct those risk workshops at the very early stage of the design, and also again towards the latter end of the design, and then you can demonstrate, because design doesn't stay still. So therefore, new risks may have been identified or may have been created as you've gone through that design, which people haven't considered. And but as I say, the biggest bang for your buck is doing it early on in the design stage, but then redoing it again later on in the design stage. And then at the end of the design, making sure your operators and maintainers are aware of what controls you have identified for them, and get them to accept those controls, not receive them just yet, because that's not the time, but they need to accept those controls are valid and achievable from their perspective. Okay, because those controls are how they, as operators, are going to manage those risks that you couldn't eliminate. Moving on, systems assurance. We are talking about alignment, establishment of quality systems. Okay, establishment of quality systems, alignment of those systems is super critical. So let me just give you a bit of a example of what I'm talking about. When you're managing requirements, looking at those, hello, sorry, someone just jumped in.
Yeah, apologies, Jeremy. Yeah, it was just another member of the group that's just joined. It's okay. I'm muted. Okay. Thanks. Just a time check as well, Jeremy.
Oh yes, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. So coming back to the systems assurance, alignment of the quality systems, what am I talking about? Okay. A classic example here is where you can look at your requirements during the construction phase, and you can plan on how you are going to get that evidence. If you work smart and not hard, you can link all your requirements back to the records that you plan to have them in back when you. So in a lot of cases, requirements during the construction phase, you link back to one of two pieces of evidence: either your as-built demonstration you did build what you did build what was designed, or your quality records that show that you did the right tests, all that kind of stuff. So if you link it back to quality records, which is a significant proportion of your evidence to demonstrate you've met the requirement during the construction phase, the time to link it back to the quality records is not when the records are produced, i.e. the test certificates. It's linking it back to the ITPs that require those test certificates. Okay, so if you've done your homework up front, construction phase tends to be quite a long phase of the project. Okay, and leaving your requirements management to the very end is going to cause you no end of grief. So what you do is when you are building your requirements phase, and this is what I'm talking about, having your assurance team sat with your quality team. So people need to understand the relationship here. Having your quality team build the inspection test plans and the lot structure to allow the inspection, the right tests and measures to be captured in your plans, and also a lot structure that means that you can close out those ITPs in a quick fashion and not have end-to-end life cycles and those lots are going to be open forever and ever. So it's building, it's working smarter, well, not harder. The ideal scenario is as those quality records are captured and all the checks and balances are done, and you've got competent people in the quality team and in your engineering team who are standing up and saying, yes, that quality record is complete and the ITP is closed. Oh no, the ITPs are complete and the lots are closed. That should be your evidence to say, yes, if that ITP was filled in and all the records were done and the lot is closed and all the NTRs are finished, I can then rely on that and close out that associated requirement. You shouldn't need to go back in and check everything's done because you've got competent people doing that already earlier on in the process. So this is all about having linked up processes and competent people managing them as you go along, and therefore a good systems assurance team should be able to link it all up at the beginning, and then as you finish up all your quality records, by definition all your requirements are also closed. Okay, talked a lot there. I'll probably get a few questions on this one. So lessons that can be applied: managing expectations of output. That's building assurance into the procurement phase. Okay, and end of story. That's how we can make sure that people are delivering what we expect them to deliver. Also, when you're working on my side of the fence on the contractors, you're not surprising the consultants by expecting them to deliver more than they've actually priced. Being fair, a good project is where everybody wins. Okay, the design consultants make money, the contractors make money, the client gets exactly what they want for the budget they paid for, on the budget or ahead of time. So everybody wins. It's not fair for a contractor to have a wishy-washy consultant contract that says you will follow our plans, and then the consultant prices that up, and they don't really have an appreciation of what you expect from them, and then suddenly they are having to hire additional 3 or 4 people just to achieve what you asked them to achieve. It's better to put that into the contract at the procurement phase and be very clear about managing their expectations, managing your expectations. Again, this all comes down to clear, consistent status definition. So if you are expecting your assumptions to be closed by the conclusion of design, what does closed actually mean to you? Because a closed assumption may be something very different to the consultant, and a building services consultant may have a very different interpretation of what a closed assumption means to an architect. Again, that's also the status of requirements. If you need to be very clear what acceptance of requirements, acknowledgement of the requirements, acceptance of the requirements, and close out of those requirements actually means to everybody. Okay, so very clear, consistent status definitions. Utilization of standard templates. We did talk about this earlier. We need to make sure that everybody is producing their output in the same way. A good thing to do is have that templates to cover things like the hazard log, templates to cover the requirements matrix, templates to even cover your design reports. Because if your design reports are structured in a certain way and it's standardized, it means that you will always be able to demonstrate that the designer has considered human factors, because there's a section in the design report template that called human factors consideration, and it prompts the designer to consider that, saying, shit, I've got to fill in something here. What do I fill in? I don't know what I need to do. I'll phone up the assurance team, ask them, all that kind of stuff. So standardization of templates is critical here, in my mind. Okay, so that's managing expectations. The next lesson that can be applied is the minimization of unplanned change during the construction phase. So again, emphasis on risk management. Okay, what do we mean by this? Is having a very good process to manage safety risk from an operations and maintenance perspective, And if you want to minimize variation, and bearing in mind what my company have understood is the value that the rail assurance team have brought to the rail projects is that we've minimized the amount of change that normally happens on these projects, because we've considered a lot of stuff earlier on and we've engaged the right people earlier on. So we've considered, how is the asset going to be used for the lifespan of the asset? Okay, access and egress with SID workshops, maintainability SID workshops. So we're going to consider how the people are going to maintain it, and do it in a time frame that doesn't mean that they have to employ another 100 people to maintain this asset in the time frame that they're allowed to do it. Major plant replacement. So whilst the building itself may need to last the next 150 years, there's very few systems that can last that time, so they need to be replaced. Even not major plant replacement, even things like earthing systems. So one of the requirements on the Sydney Metro projects is that your building lasts 150 years, but there's no system in place there's no design for an earthing rod that lasts more than 30 years. So you've got to design it so that you can replace those earthing rods after 30 years. Okay, classic example there. Future proofing, human interaction. So this is all the kind of things that you need to consider earlier on, so that you don't have many variations and you don't get surprises by the client saying, oh shit, we didn't consider X, we didn't consider Y. Because guess what? You had all this opportunity to, and you've engaged the right people to do it. This is my last point here. You've engaged the operators, you've engaged the maintainers, you've engaged the external stakeholders from a very early stage. So they've got as much ownership of the output as you do. Okay. This is probably the last slide. What are my key takeaways from this? Well, despite my background in manufacturing components for the space shuttle, this isn't rocket science. Okay, if it was, I wouldn't be the right person for the job. In my mind, it's actually quite simple. You just need to have a very high boredom threshold to manage it. You need to clearly define your processes. You need to start at the top. You need to think about system safety when you're talking risk management. Okay, you can if all your systems, if you have a key risk of fire or whatever it is, and you understand how your systems interact, and you then, as you cascade that risk down into the different locations, you make sure everything works together. Okay, you can have individual location specific risks, and also as you introduce certain controls, you introduce other risks. So look, it's not clean, but if you have a good process, and you follow that process, it can be done. Okay, again, involving the end users from the start, and engaging in the end users being the operators and maintainers. You carefully manage change. Okay, change happens, but just manage it. Requirements management is simply good project management. Admittedly, we do it on steroids in the rail sector, but I've had a number of projects come up to me that are non-rail projects. They're buildings, hotels, whatever they are within Lend-Lease, saying we need to demonstrate to the client that we've achieved what they've asked for. Guess what? That's just requirements management. And lastly, competent people, having the right people doing those jobs. Okay, and that's it from me. I'm now onto the question side of things. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people, and put on my chat. So there you go.
Hi, Jeremy. If I can just say thank you very much for a very informative and fascinating look into the world of rail assurance.
And timely, I just noticed the time. I'm sorry.
Timely, and timely without any prompts. If I can ask people to unmute themselves, and if you'd like to put your video cameras on, as Jeremy said, we'll have a quick 15-minute questions and answers session. And if I can start off, we've got a question here, Jeremy, from Jerome Harris. Jerome asks, how do you persuade rough, tough, single-minded design directors and construction directors that need to pay attention to rail assurance?
Okay, so for us, it's using and working with the client from a very early stage, okay? Because one of the challenges you have in a construction firm is usually when they're talking about quality, they want to do the right thing out on site, okay? I've not come across a contracting firm that is, or any of the tier ones really, that really just do slopshod work. They just really want to do it right, but do it on time and on budget. One of the classic phrases I remember earlier on, working for a company, I won't say who it was, is when the construction manager says, I don't care about the paperwork, I care about if they're actually doing the right job, or if they're doing the right thing out on site, okay? So that's where I'm going to focus my efforts, okay? If they're not doing the right thing, if they're producing bad quality, that's where my problem is. And I had to explain to him that actually the problem was, if you can't prove you've done the right thing, you're not going to be able to hand over the asset at the end, okay? So rail assurance is all about, from a quality perspective, it's two halves. If you are doing the right thing out on site, you've also got to prove you did the right thing out on site, which is all about the paperwork, the records. So how do you persuade people who are not used to following up with the paperwork or doing the right thing with the paperwork? Engaging with the client very early on to do an audit, and not be afraid to work with the client on this instance, because, and have a quick quiet word in their ear when they're doing an audit, saying, have you seen the skeleton in this cupboard? And getting them to highlight the issue. But the key to it is working with the client to make sure that both parties understood you're trying to achieve, the goal you're trying to achieve is to change the behavior, not to catch people out, but change the behavior. Okay, so from an assurance perspective, we're all in it together in the assurance side of things. So the people doing the audit should actually be working with you to get the right outcome, because one fails, we all fail.
Okay, thank you. Jerome, do you have any further comment on that?
No, it's great. I'm always impressed by the way that Jeremy manages to make very complex things sound relatively simple to understand.
Well, simple yourself, it's easy.
There's a lot of people in the assurance industry who manage to make very simple things sound very, very, very complex. So it's always good to hear Jeremy speak.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, another question from McCool. How do you ensure human factors requirements identified at an early design phase can be rolled out prior to the construction phase? Human factors requirements.
Human factors requirements, this is an easy one, really. So first of all, human factors is not something that can be done independently. You need to engage your human factors specialist from the very early stages. So what I always do is I always have my human factors specialist attend every single SID workshop, because they look at things through a certain lens, okay? And their lens is a very, very valid lens. So the majority of human factors issues that arise, if they're not dealt with, result in a risk. Okay, so 9 times out of 10, a human factors issue, if it becomes an issue, if it's realized, it becomes a safety risk. So a good place to have human factors people involved is in the safety and design workshops. That's not saying that they shouldn't also undertake their independent reports, but what we also do is we make sure that the human factors report comes up with a whole bunch of additional requirements. significant proportion of those requirements are actually captured as safety controls in your hazard log, okay, and therefore they get translated into derived safety requirements and managed through the as a derived requirement in the requirements management scheme, okay. So you shouldn't have any new human factors issues arise during the construction phase, because they should already have been considered during the design phase. If you have, then it's just a case of managing that as a variation and getting the right designers involved and updating the design and updating the appropriate areas. But again, all of these specialist areas like human factors and RAMs is early engagement and getting them part of the design process. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Another one from Vikram Kumar. What are the outputs that we require from rail assurance process to achieve legislative compliance through engagement with Rail Safety Authority? Are there any different approaches in various jurisdictions or states?
So I'm doing multiple projects across multiple states at the moment, and whilst in New South Wales, which is where I am, I live, we have something called a TAO scheme, Technically Assured Organisation, underneath the Transport for New South Wales. Therefore, if you want to produce anything for Transport for New South Wales, to do any of their projects, you need to be a TAO, so your company needs to do that. However, in Melbourne, in South Australia, all sorts, they're also obliged to demonstrate they've mitigated risks so far as reasonably practical. The National Safety Law requires you to do that, okay? So there is an obligation to have a project safety hazard log as one of your key outputs, because the hazard log goes with the life of the asset. It doesn't stop with the when the project's finished. It doesn't, you don't rip up that hazard log because it has no more meaning. Any live hazards then need to be transferred over to the operator for ongoing management, okay? So the hazard log is probably your key output. And then also a safety assurance report, which is the culmination of your safety argument. So at the very, very beginning of the project, you have to produce a safety assurance plan, which articulates what your safety argument is in the form usually of a goal structured notation. As I said, I could wax lyrical about this for hours, but I chose to skim over the nitty gritty. And then you produce your safety argument in the form of a safety assurance report, which demonstrates you delivered what you said you would deliver to demonstrate that the asset is safe to operate, maintain, and fit for purpose. Okay, and so your safety assurance report, safety argument, your hazard log, and usually your requirements matrix, which demonstrates that the asset is fit for purpose. Those are the three key deliverables out of any rail project that needs to be assured.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy, again. Another one, quick fire from Bardia. To expand on the first question, how do you correctly integrate systems engineering into a company's quality management system?
That's a good one. So again, this is about two things: having a well-defined quality management system, and you probably want a systems engineering procedure that talks about all the different systems engineering elements. But at the end of the day, systems engineering, you have all these specialist areas, okay? And that's not what systems assurance is. Systems assurance is taking those elements and integrating them into your design. So generally, a good systems engineering process talks about, should a project require a RAM specialist, reliability, availability, maintainability specialist, to undertake some work. It should articulate when that report needs to be produced, what output, what you do with the output. Okay, so in this instance, it would be a RAMS specialist would produce the report in a timely enough fashion so that those requirements then can get then fed back to the designer so that they can upgrade their design to meet those reliability, availability requirements. Okay, so again, this is all about requirements management and having a good streamlined method of getting your derived requirements into the designer's hands so that they can do something about it. Okay.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. A quick comment here from Ray Ramsey. If you want to pass comment, Jeremy, as well on this, ensure the human factors integration plan ties back into the specific design deliverables. Do you have any further comment on that, Jeremy?
No, that's usually down to the client. They need to articulate that they need human factors as part of it, and then it's up to us as the contractor to demonstrate how, from an integration and interface perspective, we're tying everything back together. So
yeah, it's part of your audit trail, Joe.
Pardon?
I'm using that as part of your audit trail that you need to put in your safety assurance statement.
Okay, so look, human factors integration is, for me, all about making sure that the human factors specialist has come up with all their requirements.
That's his output.
Pardon?
That's his output. Sorry, I'm in one of my booths here, and it's an echoey.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So yes, they produce a human factors integration plan, but actually the plan on its own is just a standalone plan. What you need to do is ensure that's tied back into the design requirements or those new requirements from a human factors specific. And again, the key word here is integration, not human factors. So how do we integrate the human factors back into the design? Okay. So again, this is all about derived requirements. Again, it's not rocket science. It's just about getting those requirements in a timely enough fashion to help inform the designers and not use it to hang them afterwards, saying you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that.
Okay, thank you, Ray. I'm quite conscious of time. We've got 3 minutes left. I'd like to try and squeeze in a couple more quick fire questions, if I may, Jeremy. Can you elaborate on how you adapt to changes, you or the business adapt to changes with regards to legislation and regulations?
Well, usually there is very little when change happens at that level. It's not usually a surprise. So you need to have somebody responsible in the company for engaging with people who implement those changes early on, and you can help contribute to that. So I engage very closely with Transport for New South Wales and the Asset Management Board so that I know when things are happening well in advance, so you can plan for it. So I knew that when they were proposing to evolve the old AEO system into the TAO system, I was part of that adaptation, and you know why and how they were going to learn the lessons from what went right and what went wrong on the AEO system, and then apply it to the new TAO system. You know, so again, it's not difficult to be aware of what and how you're going to adapt because you're part of the process. Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy. And just one final quick one. And if you could touch on this, obviously we've got 2 minutes left, so I'll stop yabbering on. How do you and your team implement the Lend-Lease organisation safety compliance system and communicate this effectively whilst working collaboratively with employees and management? Quite a bit in there, but if you could touch on a couple of points there.
So how do I ensure that we follow what I'm trying to get them people to do? Well, correct. I've got teams who deliver it at the project level, but my job there is to influence and educate. So you know, I see my role as not only doing the do, but ensuring everybody else does. It contributes to it. So the key to it is not to change what the company does, but to tweak it, adapt it, so that it achieves what you need it to achieve as well. So yeah, it's usually relatively easy if you come at it through that lens. But then it's constantly giving talks like this, constantly going in and having chats face to face with the right people. Yeah, as I said to you earlier on, it is unusual for me to do this via Teams. I'm usually flying all over the country, giving talks or going and having chats, sitting next to people, working with them, that kind of thing. So it's all about communication.
Thank you, Jeremy. And again, I think we'll bring this to a close now. But once again, Jeremy, thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy guy, but it's been a very, very fascinating and clearly and concisely informative presentation.
Wonderful.
I thank you once again. And to all that are present, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. I hope you've got quite a bit out of this. And if you do want to see a copy of the video and the presentation, there is a link in that box which you can all access after the meeting. Or if you have any other further questions or comments that you'd like to send through, please do so. Once again, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.